I haven't said anything! Hi guys, and welcome to Piano and Keyboard Artists, where we discuss the artists related to pianos, keyboards and synthesizers. And today it's my album review on Depeche Mode's A Broken Frame. A Broken Frame was released on the 27th of September 1982 and released under Mute Records. Produced by Daniel Miller once again, and Depeche Mode, once again recorded at Blackwing Studio in London. 3 singles were released from this album, and that was typical, common practice from Depeche Mode. What they did in the 80s was they would release typically 3 singles prior to every album, obviously just to build momentum and to promote the album. And the 3 singles they released were See You, The Meaning of Love, and Leave in Silence. And what's interesting is, in retrospect, if we look back at it now, we probably look at it and think, why didn't they release The Sun and the Rainfall? Because I think before I tell you that that's my favorite song, I think you know that, because every Depeche Mode fan will say that that's probably, The Sun and the Rainfall was probably the best track on that album. And what's interesting is the idea with singles is, when you promote singles, is to obviously put the strongest songs out in order to promote the album. But obviously at the time, The Sun and the Rainfall was not seen as a single. It was probably just seen as an album track. And I suppose if you listen to The Sun and the Rainfall, it probably is an album track. The fact that I like it the most and you probably like it the most doesn't mean that it would necessarily have been a good single. So, their choices of which single to choose, that's in the past. As I say, released in 1982, this was the second album, a follow-up to Speak and Spell. And we all know the story how Vince Clarke, it's very strange how he just decided to leave the band. You can imagine, I think it's probably because success came relatively quickly for Depeche Mode, and because they were so young, maybe they didn't really have time to sort of comprehend and think what had happened. But it was always an interesting talking fact, the fact that they got their success, they were on top of the pops, they released their first albums, gone to the charts, and then Vince decided to leave. And I believe Vince decided to leave before, and I think just as the album was finished, and which is a very, very interesting thing to do. But we talked about Vince Clarke, and I definitely want to do a video on Vince Clarke himself. Vince Clarke always had vision, and in retrospect and looking at the way things turned out now, as I said, it's a great thing that Vince Clarke did leave, because had he not left, we'd have a very different type of Depeche Mode. And indeed, there could have been a conflict of interest. I mean, Martin probably would have wanted to have written more songs. I get the idea that Vince Clarke is a very sort of dominant, kind of strong character, and I think he would have probably, possibly, I don't want to say bullied, but I don't think he would have allowed Martin to write the bulk of the material. And at which case Martin would get Fletch involved, because Fletch was kind of like the diplomat, and Fletch would go and say, "Listen, Vince, Martin wants to write more songs. Do you get me?" So it all turned out for the better. It organically turned out that Vince decided to leave for whatever reasons. And this naturally pushed Martin to the forefront as the songwriter. And as Martin Gore has said in interviews, when he was asked, they said, were you nervous at the time? Was it daunting? And Martin said something along the lines of, I think at the time he was so young and they were so naive, it was kind of like, yeah, I'll do it. This is, of course, one of the great things of youth is, you tend to not overthink things. You kind of just tend to go with your instinct. And you find as people get older, we tend to think too much. And that indeed was what Martin did with this. He just went, okay, Vince is gone. All right, I've got some songs. We'll do them. And of course, people thought, well, that's the end of the band then. But this is a surprisingly good album. And it was only listening to it again, because I've heard it a million times, as I'm sure you have as well. But listening to it again with fresh ears, I've gained a new perspective and a fresh appreciation of this album. We're going to talk about this in detail. This review is not going to be as demonstrational as my Speak and Spell review, meaning it's going to be, I want to talk more about the songs. This album to me is a lot more, I won't say more grown up than Speak and Spell, but it's a lot more serious. Interesting thing is when you listen to Speak and Spell, as soon as you stop and you put this one on, the change of tone is so dramatic. And, you know, as I had Brian Griffin in recently to talk about the artwork, and I'll place a link to in the description below so you can watch that. It is interesting how that artwork complements this album so much, because when I close my eyes while I'm listening to these songs, I really do see kind of like a cloudy sky, and it's very melancholic, and it's, you know, with the exception of a few crappy songs being The Meaning of Love and A Photograph of You, really. I mean, if they'd lost those, that, you know, because those two songs just kind of don't fit on. Yeah, they sound like they belong more on Speak and Spell, but the actual tone of this record from the first whoa, 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 on Leave in Silence, right to the fading out of the enigmatic The Sun and the Rainfall. I think, as I say, listening to it with a fresh perspective, I've really grown to appreciate this album. So let's jump into some of the geeky stuff, shall we? Right, so I just wanted to dispel a few myths or misconceptions that people have. I think most of us know that Alan Wilder was not actually involved with the production of this record, because obviously at the time when Vince Clarke had left, Depeche Mode put in an ad in I believe it was the NME, and they advertised for a new keyboard player. And interesting how Dave said how lots of weird and wonderful people came in, you know, dressed to the nines, but couldn't play keyboards. And when Alan Wilder came in, we all know the Alan Wilder story. But it's interesting, Alan Wilder was hired essentially to be just a session keyboard player, almost like, I suppose, what Peter Gaudino is, you know, a session keyboardist. And I think at the time, Dave said they were paying him like £100 a week. And, you know, and that lasted for a long time, until eventually that Alan turned around and said, look, am I part of this band or not? So this raises the question that I'm sure a lot of us had, is if Alan Wilder was involved with the production of this album, what would it sound like? Well, I don't want to fly the Alan Wilder fanboy flag that I'm always flying, but I think a lot of you will agree that if Alan was involved in this album, it would be a lot different. But anyway, we got the album we got, and this is the album we're going to talk about now. Alan does talk how he had nothing to do with the programming of this album, and he just clarified on there's a question and answer section on his Shunt website where he talks about, you know, there were rumors about Depeche Mode, you know, Andy, Dave and Martin not wanting him in the studio. There was certainly nothing sinister behind it. I don't think Alan was denied access to the studio, but as I say, he was just meant to be a session keyboardist at that stage. An interesting question on that Shunt question and answer section was the interviewer asked Alan, apparently if you take the song Shouldn't Have Done That, it's got that sort of like nursery rhyme kind of childish melody. Apparently this interviewer was asking Alan, on that part, apparently if you play the record backwards, you can hear Dave telling the story about a big bird or something like that. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm sure a lot of you are going to do that. Get your vinyl out and take it to that point where it goes and play it backwards and see if you can hear Dave's voice talking about some kind of blackbird. And of course, when Alan Wilder was asked the question, Alan just said, well, that's haven't you got better things to be doing with your time? So anyway, yeah, I'm going to try it. I'm sure you will too. Right, so let's look at some of the gear that was used in the production of Broken Frame. And as Daniel Miller said in a Sound and Sound interview, that the first two albums were made, you know, purely with analog equipment. I do want to read you something from the gatefold inlay card here of the Broken Frame album, which is written by Daniel Miller. He talks about Martin bringing a PPG into the studio. And I'll quote, he said, we recorded at Blackwing, the same studio where we made Speak and Spell. Martin had brought a PPG, one of the first digital keyboards. It was called a wavetable synth and was pretty advanced for its time, but very unreliable. We got some sounds on it and we shouldn't have otherwise got. The choir sound to see you, etc. So I mean, this is an interest. I like on these reissues, it's actually got like a little write-up from Daniel Miller. But the PPG Wave 2, it is renowned for its really sort of like crystal clear bell sounds, and you can hear that synthesizer throughout pretty much on every song. Some of the other synths used was the ARP 2600. This obviously belonged to Daniel Miller, and they used that on the Spick and Spell album as well. They also used the Korg KR55. There was the Moog Source, which was used for the bass lines. Moog Prodigy once again. The Roland Jupiter 8 is on the kit list. Now, guys, I've got this kit list from pretty reliable sources. But as I say, don't take what I say as the gospel truth, because as I really try to fact check all my information, and you guys know I get it wrong sometimes. So yeah, a Roland Jupiter 8 was on the kit list. I know for a fact that the Roland Jupiter 8 was definitely used in live performances around about that time, and it was, obviously Alan Wilder was playing it. There was also the Roland Pro Mars. They also used the Roland TR-808 drum machine, and as Daniel Miller said in a Sound on Sound interview, that they did not use the kick sounds from the TR-808. They used, I don't know what sounds they used, maybe cymbals and maybe groove kind of sounds, or, bongos and things like that. But they didn't use the kick and the snare sounds. And the reason they did that was, the TR-808's got a very distinct sound, and Depeche Mode had their own ideology. And the whole idea was to produce your own kick and snare sounds. And that's very much what they did. Because they had their own ideology, they fundamentally programmed their own kick and snare sounds. And they did use elements from the TR-808. And they didn't use, interestingly enough, there was a famous, the Linn drum, which was very famous at that time. They didn't use, and the reason they didn't use it was because it was very famous at the time and a lot of people were using it. This ties perfectly into the Depeche Mode ideology of never use the same sounds twice and always create your own sounds. So they definitely had their own ideology. There was also a SCI Pro 1, the Roland SH1, and a RSF Cabole, which I believe people at the time used to refer to as the French Moog. Everything was sequenced once again onto the Roland MC4 microcomposer, and the tape machine they used this time was a TIAC A3440 for you geeks out there, the TIAC A3440, which replaced the Revox A77, which they used on Speak and Spell. Just some more inside information if you want to know. The microphone apparently was the SM58, which is a dynamic microphone, which has been around since the beginning of time. Right, so let's talk about A Broken Frame sonically. Once again, guys, I heard this many years ago, so it's so deeply ingrained into my psyche that it's very difficult to sort of listen to it with fresh ears. But I've tried my best, and listening to, and of course you can only compare it to things that came out at the time. You can't compare it to, modern synthesizers today. But comparing it to sort of electronic music from that time, listening back to A Broken Frame, it is a bit shabby and a little bit shoddy sometimes. The production's not incredibly slick. It sounds very underproduced, almost like a very, very good demo. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because it's actually underproduced in a good way. And bear in mind, I'm comparing it to records of the time. So it is a bit dull and a bit lackluster in some ways. However, my personal opinion is that its flaws are also part of its strength. Because it sometimes has a very, I don't want to say unsophisticated sound. I sometimes don't have the vocabulary to express what I'm trying to say, but just stay with me here. So it doesn't sound like a Trevor Horn production. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's not that slick and polished. But with its, and I don't want to say it sounds ropey, but with its kind of imperfectly produced sound, if you know what I mean, it does have this kind of claustrophobic quality to it, a very longing, a very raw. So I guess what I'm saying was, initially, which may have sounded as a criticism, is actually a positive thing, because the way it turned out sonically, it's brilliant. It does sound a bit, I'm thinking of the like the drum the drum rhythm to Sun in the Rainfall. It just sounds a little bit boomy to me. And there are many examples I can give, but what stands out in this album for me is the sincerity and there's like an innocence to it. And once again, it's hard to put in words. I just feel the sincerity in this album that I have not felt in their last 3 albums, and that's a different subject we'll get to as we get to those albums. This album is not dark, but this indeed was the beginning of Depeche Mode's dark phase. But this album is not dark, it's grey. And the Brian Griffin artwork complements this beautifully, because this album, the way it sounds, is perfectly illustrated by this album cover. I think, do you know what I mean? When you listen to it, it looks like this, if you know what I mean. And if you look at that, it sounds like it sounds. I know that sounds, and that'll make sense to you if you're a hardcore fan like me. Dave's voice on this album, it's not brilliant, it's not bad. Some rumors have suggested that Dave had a cold or had the flu while he was recording this, and, you know, sang this through a cold. Now, I don't know how true that is, but I suppose a lot of, look, guys, this was 1982. It was their second album. Indeed, as I said, the production is not flawless, but there wasn't much for Dave to do here, really. I mean, if we look at the next album, Construction Time Again, that's really where his voice sort of starts. That's where the Dave gone we know starts to really come out. Dave's vocal is it doesn't stand out in this album. It really just kind of, it's just a voice, almost to the point where, you know, you could have got, I don't want to say could have got anyone to sing it. And I don't mean any disrespect by this, because I mean, I love Dave Gahan's voice. It's just that he didn't stand out in this. Dave's best vocal on this album would be the Sun in the Rainfall, because I think that was definitely, but Martin's voice on this album is brilliant. And that's just because of the material and the production. I just think songs like Shouldn't Have Done That, it was the first time we heard that real sort of like a layered Martin Gore voice, which has become sort of iconic through Depeche Mode albums. Martin's voice is not only used as a voice, but also as a special effect. I believe, like in Enjoy the Silence, when we get to the that choir sound, I believe that's Martin's voice, which is sampled and blended with other types of sounds, or we'll talk about that in another video. But yeah, pointing out Martin's voice really, really is haunting and shines out. And yeah, Dave's is, I only say that because I do rate Dave. Dave's got a lot of soul and sincerity as a singer, so, and it doesn't really come across well on this album, except for on the last track, The Sun in the Rainfall. Right, so it starts off with Leave in Silence, and Leave in Silence, just as it starts, that sets the tone perfectly for this album, because it's very sort of that very sort of like quite drony and very moody. It's just that just very simple, just goes from an A minor to an F. The sound of Leave in Silence is it's quite a serious sound. As it says, I don't know why I say this, but it has like quite a German sound. I just had the idea in the time when the Germans did electronic music, it was very serious and epic, and I think that's definitely the kind of vibe I get from this album. The chords to this song are it's quite a stern sounding song. So if we go, I've told myself so many times before, but this time I think I mean it for sure. We have reached a full stop, and nothing's gonna save us from the big drum. It's a very stern. What's interesting about Leave in Silence is the melody. Very very simple, almost quite robotic in a way. And very interesting, Alan said that apparently that lead, as it gets to the end and it's got all that improvised, it's got that kind of, it's kind of got like a random sound to it, that melody. And Alan reckons that the outro melody on Leaving Silence was actually not played. It was actually a sequencer left at random. And that does actually make a lot of sense. If you listen to it, it's like, it's really, I'm not going to do it, but it's interesting. And then if we take it to the Leaving Silence, with especially the definitive version, which that they did live in Hamburg, just listen to the lead line that Alan plays on that. Like that, and he kind of improvises it all the way. But yeah, that's just an interesting bit of trivia there. So yeah, Leaving Silence, great way to start. It really sets the tone for this album in a perfect way. Then we come on to My Secret Garden, Play the Fool, Act So Cool. I love it. And the lyrics to this song are very naive, and I just have this. It reminds me of a child just daydreaming in the school and like going, oh, I've got a secret garden. Oh no, she's found my secret garden. It's not so secret anymore. But I love the way the lyrics are unashamedly naive. It's my secret garden's not being secret anymore. Run from the house, holding my head in my hands. Feeling dejected, feeling like a child might feel. It all seems so absurd that this should have occurred. My very only secret, and I had to go unleash it. It's almost like a child who's got the secret garden, and it's now been discovered, and they don't have this, oh, don't have my secret garden anymore. So it's got this naivety. However, Martin's a lot cleverer than that. It probably has a metaphorical meaning, and this is what I love about Martin Gore. He doesn't describe his songs. He doesn't sort of do interviews and say, oh, well, this is what the song means. He just leaves the interpretation of his song lyrics up to the listener. So the chords to My Secret Garden, once again, they're quite stern. And guys, once again, I say I'm not musically trained. So when I say stern, I just mean stern. And this, I mean quite serious. So it's my secret garden's not so secret anymore. Just very, very stern. That's all the way I can say it. The melodies that run through it, the sincerity, that is the song that really reminds me of this grey clouds. I just imagine this little boy in this kind of field with this grey clouds, and he's got like these green hedges, almost, like a maze, and he's got the secret garden, and there's this little girlfriend of his that finds it, and now it's not a secret. I mean, this is all in my mind, guys. I'm a little bit crazy, but I make no apology for it. My Secret Garden ends, and it comes into what is how does it go? When the site was found, we laid the foundation down. I don't think I've ever heard an acoustic version of that song. And I found Depeche Mode do this with every album. They always throw in what I like to call a radical track, something that's really kind of groundbreaking, and that kind of, you listen to it and you go, wow, it kind of throws you. And that Monument, a song about construction, my monument, it fell down. Then of course the album after this was Construction Time again. So this could have been, I believe, I've got no reason to say this, but this could be the seed that was planted, which later spawned Construction Time again with the building of a monument. When the site was found, we laid the foundation down. It didn't take long before it came back tumbling down. Don't work at night, you need a little light. How else you gonna see what it's gonna be like? Strange, funny melody, and it's the whole vibe of that song. It's really dumb. It's very unsettling in a way, a little bit comical. I don't know what it was like at the time. When this came out in 1982, I don't know how groundbreaking it sounded, But I mean, I probably heard this in 1990 when I think 92 when I bought this album, and I still thought, wow, this is really off the wall. So God knows what it sounded like in 1982. They then go on to do one of the most beautiful melodic songs of the album, which is Nothing to Fear. A lot of the songs in this album have a real feeling of longing. There's just like this melancholic longing. It's definitely not, the whole album is definitely not as poppy as Speak and Spell. And the tone, as I say, a lot of the songs sort of start in like A minor. Here you go. I've told myself so many times before. As does Nothing to Fear. It's got that, it starts off with that sequence. And the melody is just... Listen to that. That is so nostalgic. That is longing for. That is staring out of a window into a grey sky in a field and just longing for the past. I love playing electronic music on a piano because, as I say, it strips away all the electronic sound and you're not distracted by the technology, but it means you focus more on the melody, and that is why I'm demonstrating this album on the piano. So it's got that open melody. And then the main melody comes in, which is... Strip away the production if you find it dated and old or whatever, and just listen to the melodies. Wow. And Nothing to Fear is stunning. I absolutely love the track, and it was a pleasant surprise when I heard it the first time, and I can't fault it. I just think it's brilliant. See You. All I want to do is see you again. Is that too much to ask for? I just want to see your sweet smile, the way it was before. Well, I try not to hold you and I try not to kiss you, and I swear I won't touch you. All I want to do is see you. Don't you know that's true? Sweet. I can't criticize it. The sentiment and the sincerity. Dun, 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 dun. See You, once again, starts in the A minor. There's a lot of that sort of A minor to F. If you look at, I've told myself so many times before, but this time I think I mean it for sure. See You. And of course the Nothing to Fear. What I particularly like about the See You song is that is the vibe. It's got that, oh, it's kind of like a choir, almost like a mellotron kind of choir kind of sound. I don't know exactly what it is, but it works perfectly. And Martin Gore is really a big fan of these kind of almost like, they aren't necessarily mellotron sounds, but those mellotron type sounds or harmonian sounds. If you ever listen to the demo of Enjoy the Silence, it's got that kind of harmonian type sound. It just has almost like a spiritualness to it. Once again, don't have the vocabulary to express myself sometimes. So See You concludes side 1. We then get to side 2 of the record, and the first track is Satellite. Almost got it's got kind of like a reggae feel to it. Very radical. Now hear this, my friend, I've never been the same again. as I say, this was kind of like this. You could really feel the Martin Gore songwriting coming in as soon as you turn on the first track on this album. That it's not only the tone that has changed in this album, but it's also the tempos are a lot slower. If you listen to Depeche Mode's tempos are quite slow. They're not, certainly not the speeds they were in, you know, in Speak and Spell. So Satellite is definitely a grey, now here, this my friend. Definitely just an album track. Nothing exciting, not bad. And then the tone changes completely. The Meaning of Love. What the hell? It's like Vince Clarke just walked into the building. If they're friends of mine, if they could spend a few minutes of their time. I don't even know the lyrics. I know The Meaning of Love and the Photograph of You, which is just after. I always skip those songs, so I never liked them. And what's interesting about this album is if you start with Leaving Silence, then move on to My Secret Garden, and then on to Monument, and then on to Nothing to Fear, and then on to See You. It kind of plays out like Violator in a way, because Violator is like sonic perfection as far as any album goes. Violator had this perfect sort of running order. And this album, to me, side one has, okay, of course it's not as good as, it's not as brilliant as Violator, of course it isn't. But the sort of like the track listing, the way it flows from Leaving Silence all the way to See You, it flows pretty well. And of course, as I say, you turn on side two, you get Satellite, and as soon as The Meaning of Love comes in, you're like, oh my god, it's just like, it's like a Speak and Spell song that found its way onto the album. It's well up there, or should I say well down there with Hey, You're Such a Pretty Boy, and songs like that. Photograph of You, as I say, guys, these are just like two lame pop songs that made it on here. But, you know, I'm not going to criticize them too much because, you know, this was at the time. I can really feel the sincerity in this album. There is such sincerity, and I can really feel their hunger at the time to kind of just do something great. Yeah, so brushing over The Meaning of Love and A Photograph of You, we're back to the original flow of this album, the original tone, and we get Shouldn't Have Done That. And that, to me, is another song. You listen to that song, you picture a grey sky, and I just love that, the harmony. Plans made in the nursery. Shouldn't Have Done That. Very interesting. And there's a rumor to this, and I'd love you guys to help me debunk this rumor, is the subject matter on plans made in the nursery can change the course of history. Remember that. Mum is annoyed, said go and play. Don't show your face. Stay away all day. Shouldn't have done that. Very grown-up song. That's funny, you know, you just had a Photograph of You, which is, yeah. And then you get Shouldn't Have Done That. And if you really think about what the message is, it's almost things that we say. It's almost a bit like, we can't take them back. Shouldn't have done that. Because it's like that butterfly effect. Every decision you make will have a consequence later on. And it's a very deep song, this. It's very, very creepy. But yeah, Shouldn't Have Done That. Really, really deep subject matter. Absolutely love it. It's got that. The first time I heard that, I laughed because it just sounded so childish. It was like, oh my god, is this like a cheap kid, you know, like cheesy kiddies keyboard? But of course, it's got this whole sort of like nursery rhyme. Shouldn't have done that. And then it goes into this like middle eighth where it just changes. And it's so atmospheric. What's also interesting about this album is, guys, when I talked about Speak and Spell, I talked about it being very honest. I talked about it as, you know, like almost like a beautiful woman without makeup. It didn't need much makeup. Speak and Spell was very honest. It was essentially just drum and bass and sequence and melody. And it had no sort of like atmospheric sounds, you know, like, you know, all those droning atmospheric sounds. This has a lot. And what this album was, the first sort of Depeche Mode album, you know, where Depeche Mode, a lot of their albums, the songs kind of blend into each other, for the lack of a better explanation. Used it a lot in Violator. I'm thinking when Enjoy the Silence ends, you get that. And then it goes, it sounds like this distorted kind of metallic bagpipe, God knows what kind of sound. And then it blends into Policy of Truth. As in Violator, and if you think of the end of Put It On, Blue Dress, the way it blends into the song Clean. And that's exactly what they did here, how if you listen to the end of Shouldn't Have Done That, it's got that. It's got like a clap. Oh, I wonder if they got Fletch to do the clapping for that. Mommy's annoyed, says go and play, stay away all day, shouldn't have done that. Yeah, I think that's where Fletch got his debut clapping in. But yeah, it's got like this great song. This is an absolutely great song. And rumor has it that this song is about Adolf Hitler. And this is something I'd love you guys to discuss with me. Shouldn't have done that. Small boy and his infantry marching along so naturally. Shouldn't have done that. Is Martin indeed writing and singing about the young Adolf Hitler in this? I don't know. I'd love to hear your views. It blends off sort of like atmospherically, and then comes into the most beautiful song on the album, which I'm sure a lot of you will agree with, The Sun and the Rainfall. The melody to this song is absolutely mesmerizing. It has that same dreamy feel as a lot of the songs on this. And if we strip the synthesizers and electronics away and we just play on the piano, it's... That is just absolutely mesmerizing. It's hypnotic. I mean, just listen to the simplicity of it. It's very deep, guys, and I often said, and I pointed this out when I did my Erasure series, was very often electronic pop music gets pushed aside as not being serious, but if you listen to it on the piano, it just sounds, you can kind of hear the honesty and the emotion in the bare melody, and that it's beautiful, and there's something wonderfully sort of like repetitive. I love the way it fades out. Something I do miss in modern music is the way songs don't fade out anymore. Have you noticed when you listen to music always these days, it starts and it stops. Songs don't tend to fade out anymore. And that is something I've started doing personally in a lot of my productions. Because to me, when a song fades out, what that implies is, and so on, etc., etc. It kind of just lets you drift out as opposed to stopping. And yeah, the fade out is probably something that's not very modern in music these days. So The Sun and the Rainfall plays out and concludes their second album. Guys, I really, really enjoyed this album. Listening to it, you know, quite often again with fresh ears and a fresh perspective for these album reviews. It has definitely gone up in my estimation and in my rating. And as we did in the first album review series, I'm now going to roll out the 5 questions. And question number 1 is, if I was to lose a song from this album, which would it be? Maybe The Meaning of Love. Yeah, let's lose The Meaning of Love. That's got to go. So yeah, if I had to lose a song, I'd lose The Meaning of Love. Question 2, what is the most radical track on this album? I would probably say it was a tie-up between Shouldn't Have Done That and Monument, but I'm going to go with Monument just because it's so like, it's kind of like it reminds me of like a creepy clown, kind of like walking in this like field, you know. Imagine like a creepy clown, like it, walking in this field with this grey sky, and he's juggling. He's got a red nose and he's juggling. definitely the most radical track I'm going to say would be Monument. Then question number 3, which song have I listened to the most on this album? That's very difficult to say. I would probably say the song I did listen to the most was probably Nothing to Fear. I've always loved it. Which brings me on to question 4, which is my most favorite song now? I would definitely say The Sun and the Rainfall, without a doubt. And indeed, that was Alan Wilder's favorite song on the album. And I'm sure most of you will say it's your favorite song as well. And then, final question, what am I going to rate this? Well, if you remember, I rated Speak and Spell 7 out of 10. And this to me is, remember, there are all kinds of mitigating factors that need to come into play. With all things considered, I'm going to rate A Broken Frame 7.5 out of 10. Right, guys, and that brings us to the end of the album review for A Broken Frame. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to put links below in the description so you can watch the Brian Griffin interview I had where we spoke about the artwork. And I'm also going to place links below to the Speak and Spell album review, as well as the Speak and Spell interview I did with Brian Griffin where we talked about the artwork. I'm really enjoying these album reviews, guys. The next one will be Construction Time again, and I will obviously get Brian Griffin in as well on the separate episode to discuss his artwork. So guys, I would like you to participate in the 5 questions, and the question 1 being, if you had to lose a song from this album, if one song had to go, which song would it be? Question number 2, which song do you feel is the most radical track on this album? Question number 3, which song do you think you've listened to the most on this album? Question number 4, which song do you like the most these days? Because these albums tend to, over the years, you tend to sort of like change, which, you feel differently about the songs as the years go. So question 4 is, which song do you like the most now? And of course, the final question, question 5, is what would you rate this Broken Frame album out of 10? That'll be interesting. Guys, lots of love to you. Always a blast. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video, which is on Wednesday. Until then, take care of yourselves, and I will see you on the Facebook group. Adios.